Well, the New York Mets have finally addressed some of their needs in the bullpen as they have agreed to a one-year deal with Adam Ottavino. I'll break down that deal and everything else we're hearing when it comes to the Mets and free agency right now on this latest edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where we've been doing a lot of different things over the weekend here, trying to cover all of this free agent news. You can go to Just Baseball to check out my article breaking down the Chris Bassett trade. Also, we have our MLB free agency thread where I've been updating for all the different signs that have been going on around the league. So that's a great place to go if you want to stay on the pulse of everything going on in this crazy free agent period, which, let's be honest, has not been as crazy as we expected. There's still a lot of big names out there right now that have yet to be signed. You have Michael Conforto when it comes to a New York Mets free agent. We still don't know where he's going to play next season. You still have Carlos Correa and Freddie Freeman out there in the relief market. You still have some of the biggest names, and obviously Kenley Jansen, Colin McHugh, Ryan Tepera, Andrew Chafin. All of this, of course, could change as you're listening to this show. Right now it's 6:22 on the East Coast here on Sunday night. So we'll see if any of this changes. But at the moment, it's been a market that has developed a little bit slower than we would have anticipated. And the Mets have finally made a signing in that market by acquiring Adam Ottavino. Now, Adam Ottavino, if you just want to really make this as simple of a addition in your mind, how to understand what he brings to the table, very similar profile to Jeurys Familia. A big guy who has a ton of experience, a big arm. He has a really good breaking ball. His slider is elite. He's going to strike out a lot of batters, but he's also going to walk a lot of batters. He could be incredible and lights out as he's been in the past and be a late inning reliever for you, or he could be a guy that you don't really trust in those late innings, but can still get you, through a season. I mean, Jeurys Familia was key to the Mets last year. He still pitched a ton. You need arms out there that are experienced, that can go out and can pitch, and Adam Ottavino is that. So in that sense, this is a good sign. But before we get into some of the details of it, I just want to break down his career a bit for those of you who aren't familiar with Adam Ottavino, who did most recently spent some time with the Yankees, where you probably might have heard of him a little bit more. But he started his career in the National League, was drafted in the first round in 2006 by the St. Louis Cardinals. He is 36 years old, made his debut in 2010, didn't get a ton of opportunities with the Cardinals, was not very successful there. Ends up getting claimed off waivers by the Rockies, where he pitched to a 4.56 ERA in 2012. Then in 2013, he pitched to a 2.64 ERA. And that's when I know personally I was made aware of him, because he was one of the rare pitchers that was finding success in Colorado, pitching in Coors Field, as difficult as that is. You need a great strikeout pitcher, and Ottavino certainly was that with the Rockies. Had a 3.60 ERA in 2014. In 2015, he was off to a great start, did not allow a single run through his first 10 appearances, but ended up having to get Tommy John surgery, which took him out for a little bit. Ultimately, altogether, 7 seasons with the Rockies, a 3.41 ERA, 10.4 strikeout per 9 over nearly 400 innings pitched. Became a free agent heading into the 2019 season, and that is when he signed with the New York Yankees on a 3-year, $27 million deal. In 2019, he was outstanding for them, a 1.90 ERA and 66 1/3 innings pitched with 88 strikeouts. 2020 rolled around, and in the shortened season, he was not as successful, pitching to a 5.89 ERA over 18 1/3. Ends up getting traded to the Red Sox for the final year of that deal, where he pitched to a 4.21 ERA last season across 62 innings pitched, still struck out 71 batters throughout his entire career as a relief pitcher. That strikeout per 9 is generally always in the double digits, so that is what he brings to the table it comes down to the strikeouts and also, of course, that really good slider that he pairs with velocity still. He still averages about 95 miles per hour on both his fastball and his sinker. He relies on that slider a ton, throws it 46.4% of the time compared to his fastball and sinker, which if you combine them, throws them about 48.2% of the time. Also will mix in the occasional curveball, cutter, or changeup. Then again, though, that could just be, a counting error by Baseball Savant with how they distinguish what pitch is what. At the end of the day, it comes down to the slider, which is what we've been talking about all off season, right? When I broke down some of the best relievers best left on the market, I referenced how all of them, it comes down to having a really good slider, and that is what Adam Ottavino has. The horizontal break on his slider of 19 inches is 8.1 inches more than your average slider. So that is an absolute bender of a pitch. Could just start from the batter's shoulder if it's a righty and go to the outside part of the box. It's just a nasty pitch. You can throw it for a strike. You can throw it to get strikeouts. That's what you're looking for here. It's a 1-year deal for Ottavino, $4 million. Jeurys Familia just got a $6 million deal with the Phillies. So very similar contracts. Ottavino also has $1 million in performance bonuses that he could attain. You look at what they did last year, and it's the same words for both of the pitchers, for Familia and Ottavino. It's the walks. For Familia, his walk per nine was 4.1 last year. For Ottavino, it was 5.1. So a little bit worse than Familia when it comes to walking batters. Basically, the best way that I could really sum up this deal here is you get a pitcher that fills the Familia role without the Familia baggage. Because, I saw some people rejoicing that Familia was no longer a Met when he signed that deal with the Phillies, talking about how, maybe the Phillies now, or maybe the Mets would get to enjoy some wins with Familia, turning the favor for some of the mistakes he's made over the last couple of seasons. And the one thing I'll say about Jeurys Familia is, his 2019 season was dreadful, and it made you regret bringing him back. But you really look at the totality of his Mets career, he's third on the all-time save list. His ERA for his career is 3.27 with the Mets, 3.28 overall. He's been a really good relief pitcher for a really long time. Off the top of my head, I don't think it is at all a stretch to say he's a top 10 reliever in Mets history. Honestly, you could probably say a top 5 reliever in Mets history. And again, this isn't me diving really deep into it, but when you're talking about a guy that was a lights out closer for one of the few teams that made it to a World Series, I think he deserves a little bit more respect. And, since we're on the topic, I do want to just go to his baseball reference here and read you his stats in that postseason run, because he gets such a bad rap for the Alex Gordon home run, which was awful. And I think cost the Mets the World Series, where he quick pitched Alex Gordon in game 1. Gordon hits the home run to tie it. The Mets lose in extras. I think they win that series, if not for that one pitch. But Familia was still great in that entire run. In the NLDS, 4 games pitched, 5 1/3, did not allow a single run. In the NLCS, 4 games pitched, 4 1/3, did not allow a single run. Racked up 5 saves in those first 2 series. And even in the World Series, where he gets all of that flack, he still pitched to a 1.80 ERA. The only run he allowed in 5 innings pitched was that quick pitch home run. He actually was able to get out of that inning. He came in for Matt Harvey in that devastating loss in game 5 and got out of the jam without giving up any earned runs himself. Obviously, he gave up the run that Harvey had put on the bases, but if not for a bad throw by Lucas Duda, who knows? Maybe everything breaks out differently. But I figured, since we were on the topic, since the Mets just signed someone to basically fill that role, I should take a second here to acknowledge the career that Familia had with the Mets, because honestly, I think we're going to remember it a lot more fondly as we get a little bit of distance from his time wearing a Mets uniform. But with that said, Billy Eppler and Buck Showalter met with the media today, so I want to talk about that a bit. What is left to do for the Mets as we continue to get ready for the beginning of spring training games, and free agency continues to be in full swing with a lot of guys left unsigned. Before we get to that, though, it's that time of year again, as college basketball's tournament is finally upon us. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline.net is the number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so Billy Eppler, the Mets GM, and Buck Showalter, their manager, met with the media today in a fun 30-minute press conference. If you don't have anything to do, I encourage you to go to YouTube and watch it on SNY. They also had a feed to it on Twitter. It's just great to see these guys talk in general. I think Buck Showalter is going to be so much fun throughout the season just to have them in these post-game press conferences and the pregame stuff. But that's the role of a manager. Like, that is their function when it comes to the fan experience. What happens in the dugout, we never really know or never really have a great gauge on what a manager is bringing to the table. And Buck Showalter has the experience that I trust. He's going to do a great job with that part of it. But there is also this media element to it. It's the face of your team in a lot of respects. And seeing Buck Showalter, fiddle with a baseball and crack jokes and go through the press conference, it's just going to bring a lightness to the season that's going to be welcomed, I think, as we get into some of those times where I'm sure the Mets might lose 6 of 10 and everyone's going to be jumping off a bridge. Buck Showalter, I think, can really ground everybody. So that has continued to be an impression I get every time we see Buck Showalter meet with the media. And the same kind of goes with Billy Eppler in a different way. You just respect his experience as opposed to some of the other GMs we've seen sit in that seat over the last couple of years. You can just tell that he knows what he's doing. He has a pretty wide gauge here to do whatever he wants with Steve Cohen's money. Obviously, Cohen has to sign off on things, but Billy Eppler talked about it that, Cohen says, keep bringing me opportunities. He wants to learn more. Steve Cohen is very involved. Let's not mistake this by any stretch. Steve Cohen is integrated into the Mets decision making for sure. He played a big role apparently in the Chris Bassett trade, signing off on that. So there is a real collaboration that's going on right now with Steve Cohen down to Billy Eppler and Buck Showalter. You'd love to see that. And you love to see Billy Eppler really just get to enjoy his job. This is a guy who has been in baseball for a very long time, and it's got to be refreshing to just keep your pulse on the marketplace and know that you can really go any which direction. Obviously, you're going to make the best move for your team, and you don't want to make too many moves. You don't want to, to continue to tinker to the point where you maybe ruin clubhouse chemistry. You maybe go a step too far, but it's got to be refreshing again to be able to explore everything, present things to ownership, and know that financially, that's never going to be a constraint that limits you from making a move. So all of that stuff is just exciting for the future. When it comes to the present, Billy Eppler was asked if the Mets are going to add another position player, and he says he does not foresee the Mets addressing their position players at any point at this stage. He said he'll still be open to other opportunities if they present themselves, but for now, they're comfortable with the position players they have, which is a little bit of a change in the narrative, I guess, or in the reporting that we've heard recently, because ever since the lockout first started, there was still those rumblings and those reports that would come out that the Mets were still interested in adding a bat. And now I feel like they are comfortable with what they have. Maybe they now understand that they can go into camp with the Jeff McNeil, with the Dominic Smith, with the Robinson Cano and a JD Davis. And it doesn't require an outside addition. You don't need to spend a $20 million on a Kyle Schwarber, for example, to be your DH when you're already spending 20 on Robinson Cano, and Cano might be able to fill that role for you very well this season. So I know fans always want more, but we've talked about this a lot throughout the offseason. After the additions of Starling Marte, Eduardo Escobar, Mark Canha, I've really liked what the Mets have right now. In their outfield, it's as solid as it gets with Canha, Marte, and Nimmo. And you even have Dominic Smith, who I think is a good fourth outfielder, not necessarily being able to back up every position in that traditional sense, but a good fourth outfielder in that if Brandon Nimmo goes down with an injury in the first week of the season, I don't think any of us would be surprised if Dominic Smith could, hold down left field for a few months until he gets back. I think he's still a good enough hitter, and he's proven that he can play out there if he has to. You also have Nick Plummer and Khalil Lee. And I think the Mets really like those guys as options to make this team potentially. So that is where they're at in the outfield and the infield. They're set with Jeff McNeil as their starting second baseman. And I think he's better than really anything you could have reasonably gotten in the market. Like, yeah, sure. The Mets could have signed Carlos Correa, but that's not realistic. They could sign Chris Bryant, but I've talked at length about why Jeff McNeil, in my opinion, is a better player, particularly when you factor in the difference in contracts and the long-term flexibility that each of them provides your roster. If you sign a Chris Bryant, that's going to lock you into a certain extent because then there's a good chance you trade Jeff McNeil. McNeil gives you that flexibility to always have a guy that can be an above average starter at second base, third base, or either of the corner spots in the outfield. And to me, that is invaluable. So when I hear Billy Eppler say we're likely done adding position players, that means Jeff McNeil is staying put. I know there's been a lot of rumors about McNeil, JD Davis, Dominic Smith, all potentially being on the move. You're not giving up Jeff McNeil if there's no free agent signing coming in. It's just that simple. And when it comes to the other guys, I still think that there is a chance that we could see them moved. But Billy Eppler did acknowledge that, it comes down to other teams' needs and wants as well when you are in the trade market. So the Mets can't just decide unilaterally they're going to get rid of these guys and then just deal them for a package that's not suitable to what they think these guys are, when it comes to their value to the Mets. And maybe they're more valuable on the roster. I still think one of the moves, I really do, but it's going to take some time now to see if that trade can come together. And we're not sure even, what the Mets will be looking for if they do trade one of those players, other than maybe clearing the roster spot and adding some prospects. With that said, you're looking at Robinson Cano likely getting some big run here. And we'll see what happens as him being maybe the primary DH to start the season. I think Cano can be an above average hitter. I've talked about it on podcasts in the past. You can find that if you look up Robinson Cano throughout the podcast archive or on YouTube. I think he's going to be an above average hitter for the Mets and can play a really good role for them this season. And again, with that quote there from Billy Eppler talking about not necessarily addressing position players at this stage, they're going to need Cano. So we'll see what happens in regards to that. Finally, when it comes to adding a left-handed reliever, Billy Eppler sort of threw out some names that were in-house, like Alex Claudio, as options to fill that role. I still believe they're going to make a move, but Billy Eppler has to play things a little bit close to the vest here. They're probably still in active negotiations with the top lefties on the market. We did see today there was a report that they were still in on Brad Hand and bringing him back. So that could be a very simple fix. And then you're going to the season with Ottavino in hand as your replacement for an Aaron Loop, and your bullpen stays pretty much the same. Or will Aaron Loop and Familia, I guess I should say. I think that's fine. Their bullpen was good last year, and they can always add to the bullpen during the season. Anyway, that's been a bit long-winded as I've gone through all of the recent free agent news. I want to talk a bit about the optimism I saw, though, in that press conference heading into the season. Buck Showalter, Billy Eppler, I think they're really enjoying this opportunity to build out the Mets, and I think they have really high hopes for what this season's going to mean. I want to discuss that more in just a minute, but first I want to tell you about the best tasting protein bar ever. Built bars have made my diet so much healthier. I've gotten rid of candy bars and some of the other sweets I used to eat because Built bars are a delicious treat that cures that sweet tooth for me, whether it's the traditional Built bars with flavors like mint brownie, cookies and cream, which is my personal favorite, coconut almond, or their new puffs, which are the first ever protein infused marshmallows. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they come covered in 100% real chocolate, just like the Built bars. Built is always coming out with new flavors, so make sure you check their site often to see what's new. Go to built.com, and once you're there, make sure you use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, so I want to close off the show today just talking about the general buzz we're seeing right now coming out of Port St. Lucie. I don't think I'm reading into it too much, but it seems like every little video you get, every little clip, maybe it's just because we're on Twitter and social media and we're seeing the fan reaction paired to these little morsels you get of baseball being back and seeing the guys in person, but there seems to be something in the air. I got to imagine when you're going into a season and you've been, arguably the most active team in free agency in the trade market, you keep on adding stars, you have an expectation to win. That has to be really exciting for the players, the coaches, everyone involved. When you're in that environment, when you're about to kick off a season, there's always that optimism. But for the Mets, that optimism is at an all-time high. The expectations are at an all-time high. And Billy Eppler and Buck Showalter sort of welcome that. When you hear them talk in the press conference, they know they have to win. That's the expectation. That's what they're supposed to do. It's about making a run in October. And so there is definitely some pressure that comes with that, but I feel like they have the type of experience to manage that pressure. I know Buck Showalter was referencing how him and Glenn Sherlock were going through their notes when the two of them were working together after the strike and the last time the league was shut down in 94 and 95. And they said, the spring training to the day was very similar to the environment they're in now, how history kind of repeats itself, which is interesting in itself. But to me, the interesting thing was that both of these guys still are keeping their notes from 30 years ago. These are meticulous baseball men who've been at this for a really long time. And I think that's the type of coaching staff you want for a roster like this that's so veteran laden. I mean, you're talking about now rotation where Taijuan Walker is the spring chicken. Was he 31 years old? Taijuan Walker, off the top of my head, maybe I'm making Taijuan a little older than I think he is, but he's 29. I apologize, Taijuan. You're still in your 20s. I should not have done that to you. But yeah, I mean, Carlos Carrasco, Chris Bassett, Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer are all in their mid to late 30s. This is an older team. Starling Marte, Mark Canha, Eduardo Escobar, all in their mid 30s. You have Robinson Cano, his late 30s. I mean, this is a veteran roster, but they had that experience from the top. And, I was talking about Robinson Cano a bit before, and apparently he is going to address the team and I guess apologize for taking steroids. But to hear Buck Showalter and Billy Eppler both talk about him with some affection and how, Billy Epler's like, hey, we go back a long time, both with the Yankees. Buck Showalter talked about how he has already spoken with him a lot. So I think because all these guys have been around the block, you can look at a Robinson Cano a little bit differently and just take him for what he is. And on this team, Robinson Cano is maybe expensive, but you throw the money aside. I don't know how many teams have a left-handed bat off their bench that's better than a Robinson Cano. And you look at the career numbers, he produces. Even in 2019, I've talked about this before in the past, but I'll bring up the stat again. If you look at the extra base hits that Robinson Cano had in 2019, which was arguably the worst year of his career when he missed a bunch of time, or not a bunch of time, about 40 games due to injury, he had more extra base hits that season than anyone on the Mets last year not named Pete Alonso. Okay, so that was him at his worst. I still think there's value there. And I look at where the Mets are as a team. Yes. Could they go out and add Andrew Chafin and put a lefty in that bullpen? Sure. If they wanted to, could they still maybe surprise us and throw another bat in the mix? And wouldn't that be nice? Absolutely. You have a rotation after the Chris Bassett trade now that is absolutely dynamic. And it goes 1 to 9, in my opinion, because 1 through 5, it's as good as it gets with Scherzer and deGrom. And now Bassett as your 3. Carrasco, I'm really high on. Taijuan Walker as your 5th starter, who was an all-star last year. It's a pretty good 5th starter to have. And then the depth with David Peterson, Tyler McGill, Trevor Williams, Jordan Yamamoto. It's just a very deep team, top to bottom, a very deep 40-man roster. And it's a team that's built for October. So hopefully they get there. There's a lot that has to take place before that. But also, you look at the NL East right now. We're not sure if Freddie Freeman's going to return to the Braves or not. But none of those teams have really been active throughout this offseason. The Marlins have maybe been the most active, and they maybe had the most ground to cover to catch up to the top teams in this division when it comes to their roster. So the Mets are in the driver's seat right now in the NL East. I think that everyone knows that in that building, and it's going to be a really exciting spring leading into a really promising season. So I am looking forward to covering all of it here. Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan, but we call him Sully. He's going to break down everything going on throughout Major League Baseball, so you can check out Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.